Today on MetCast, I'm joined by Dan Bartels as we talk about all the latest Mets updates, what's going on with Pete Alonso. If they sign Bregman, is there still a possibility of us bringing Pete back? Next on MetCast. What's going on, everybody? As always, I am Ray, and I'm joined today by Dan Bartels. Everybody knows who you are, Dan. You've been around the block for a minute, co-hosting our Twitter Spaces. What's going on, my man? So much news to get to.
Ray, how are you? Thank you for having me on. This is cool. I love the intro video too. Look what you're doing now, Ray. Come
Yeah,
on.
you know what's funny? I got to change up my background. I've been thinking, I got my autographed Curtis Martin jersey right here. Over there, I got the sack exchange. Everybody's like, what the hell's going on? Let's get to some of these Met stuff going on in the background.
Right.
But there's a lot going on in baseball, and let's kick off. What a way to kick off today. We heard about the sad news about Henderson. Why don't you tell us what you know about him, what he meant to you, and we'll get into baseball right after that.
Listen, I didn't really get to see Rickey play, so I've seen highlights of everything. He's great. He was the Mets bench coach 06, 07, so he did have some ties to the team. He played with the Mets too, of course. He was a great hitter. We all know that. The best leadoff hitter to ever exist. 3,000 hits, just fell shy of 300 home runs. But this is a guy, Ray, with an 111 career WAR. I mean, that is just unprecedented.
Right.
And it's a sad baseball loss, definitely. But again, rest in peace.
Very young, very young. Sad to see it. Almost like every year you see this with football players. You don't really see it that much with baseball players. But Godspeed. Hope he's up with the big man today.
Yep.
But all right, let's get into some baseball things. You saw the Yankees sign Christian Walker, that 3-year, $60 million contract. It's not the Yankees, excuse me, the Astros. A little surprising to me, knowing that they traded Kyle. Some of these moves, Dan. I mean, they got the Cubs. The Cubs trade for Kyle Tucker, go and trade Bellinger, who would help them win now. And then Houston is potentially letting Bregman walk, and they're bringing in a guy like Christian Walker, who, if they wanted to win, they would keep Kyle Tucker and try to keep Bregman. Right. What are your thoughts?
It's crazy. A lot of these moves we've seen, and Christian Walker's a weird one, right? Because 3 years, $60 million. I didn't think that would be the going rate for Christian Walker, but he went pretty early, and now we've seen a domino effect with these other first basemen around the league. Josh Naylor got traded. Carlos Santana's gone. So there's definitely a lot of these moves that we've seen now with the first base market, and it's interesting. And I think with Christian Walker, he's a guy that was definitely compared to Pete. We'll get to him later too, but I don't think it was justified. I don't think Christian Walker's as good of a player as Pete Alonso, and he's 4 years older. He has a birthday in March, so Pete has a whole year on him, so that's a whole nother conversation. But the first base market is very interesting.
I put it up right there. You got John Heyman saying that Christian, obviously Carlos Santana, and I tweeted this out yesterday. I would lose my what if the New York Mets signed Carlos Santana. Now listen, I was interested in Paul Goldschmidt, but I wasn't interested in him for the first base position. And that's where, Met fans started attacking me. Listen, he's 37 years old. Maybe he could have played that JD Martinez, elder statesman on the team, DH kind of role. But clearly the New York Yankees were willing to give him a position on the field. Clearly he still wants to play on the field. So maybe that played a lot into it. Also, I don't know if the New York Mets were totally invested in this Goldschmidt negotiation. Maybe they used it as leverage, saying, hey, Pete, we're starting to explore other options. Get your you-know-what into the negotiating room.
Yeah, Paul Goldschmidt's a weird one. 2022 MVP. It feels like so long ago that he won that award, but it was interesting because Pete Alonso looked up to Paul Goldschmidt as a player. So I always had that idea like, oh, could the Mets, be in on Goldschmidt, maybe put him at DH, but he is the better fielder than Alonso, even at this point in his career. But yeah, you see, Christian Walker goes to Houston, Goldschmidt goes to the Yankees, Naylor to Arizona, Santana to Cleveland. Like the first base market is moving.
What were your thoughts on Naylor?
Naylor, I liked it. I would have wished the Mets traded for him too. If Pete was gone, obviously not in the mix, it would have been definitely an option. But all these first basemen, like you could never really talk about Pete in the same vein as these guys because look at the way they went off the board so quick. Like it was never going to be a case where Pete was going to go before these guys. So would it have been nice to get Naylor? Yeah. But Goldschmidt, I like that for the Yankees. They had to fill that void with Anthony Rizzo gone. And listen, I think they're going to take a real risk by putting Goldschmidt in that lineup, but I think it's going to pay off.
Yeah, I agree with you with that. I mean, it's only a 1-year contract. It's probably his final contract. I would think that his days are going to be put behind him shortly. Obviously, a great player throughout his career. Now, I want to bring it back to what we're currently seeing. And we saw this really, and we were just talking out of this really interesting quote from Michael Mayer.
Mm-hmm.
Mets continue to show interest in Alex Bregman. They're a legitimate potential landing spot for the infielder. And obviously, a lot of Met fans think if you sign Bregman, that means Vientos is going to first base. You see conflicting things. And I'm going to bring up Pat Randazzo's recent comments in regard to that. So I was thinking the same thing until we dug a little deeper. And Mets Giants Nick Soto fan said, if the Mets get Bregman, are they out on Pete? And Mike Mayer responded, to my understanding, no. What are your initial thoughts? And then I'll give my thoughts on that, because that is a new development from my perspective.
Yeah. Listen, if you get Bregman in this lineup, I truthfully believe that Vientos has a real possibility of being the DH. I would personally want Bregman at third. He just won the Gold Glove there. And you want some more assurance at third base. A lot of people are really not comfortable with Vientos at third. I personally am, but those throws to the plate in the playoffs were definitely troublesome. Yeah. So I think in totality, Vientos should be developmentally growing at third base. I think that's the best for him. But if you get Bregman in here, it's going to have some questions, no doubt. But in truth, I think he would end up at second base. I think the Mets do want to see Vientos develop, but we'll see. It doesn't take Pete out of the equation by any stretch, though.
Right. To me, if Steve Cohen, Dan, let's put our thinking caps on for a second. If Steve Cohen wants to have a monster lineup, telling me you're adding Bregman, who's clutch as hell, bringing Pete back, and having Vientos as a full-time DH. Now we have this from Pat Randazzo. Kind of throws a little bit of cold water on it. The Mets want to develop Vientos out of position. For now, it's third base, as opposed to sticking him at a full-time DH early in his career. Now, listen, how I also take that is, that's the Mets' preference. Now, if Bregman's money, because think about this, who's really in on Bregman? It looks like the Yankees are probably going to end up with Arenado. In my opinion, that could change. But if you're looking around baseball, who's totally interested in Bregman? His old town team in Houston is pretty much out. Maybe the Red Sox get involved. Maybe the Orioles get involved. But the temptation to have a Gold Glove third baseman, a Gold Glove shortstop, potentially Acuna, who could absolutely be a Gold Glove second baseman at second. And Pete, yes, I know he's a defensive liability. He doesn't grade out great, but his pick rate is absolutely insane. And he's shown that he's getting a little bit better. And a big thing for me is, if you sign Bregman, say it's a 6-year contract, Pete in 2 years, maybe he is picking the DH role and Vientos is moving into that first base position. Who knows? Maybe the Mets, I mean, there's been bigger surprises throughout MLB. Is there any possibility the Mets say, hey, listen, we don't view you as a first baseman going forward. We're willing to pay you 5 years, 125, but you're going to be our first base backup option, and DH, we're moving Vientos because we want to get more athletic at first base, and you're going to be our Big Papi. You're going to be our Kyle Schwarber. You could still leave that lasting legacy. You know what I mean? Like, show how great you are at the plate. Just focus at that, hit bombs, and let's make this lineup deeper. Now, it's probably not realistic, that option, but I've seen crazier things happen in Major League Baseball.
Right. And pertaining to Bregman, I think you'll always hear the one thing, that he lives off the Crawford boxes in left field. He's a pull-happy hitter. But you also look the back of a baseball card, and he hasn't struck out over 100 times once in his single career, like ever. That's really impressive. So there's definitely added value to Bregman. I do want to say that. With Vientos going to first, like, yeah, on the surface, I think in a couple years we will see that. Unless Ryan Clifford pans out, that's the only way I could see a world where Pete's kind of done at first base. He's probably going to DH if it's not Soto. Yeah, you want to get more athletic, but I do think that, listen, look at what Bryce Harper did. Look at the way that he was able to transform his career in the middle of it, go to first base and be fine. So it could happen, but getting Bregman in here, it's probably better that he does play third.
Now, I did a video yesterday. It might be a little, how do I put this? A little imaginatory, if that's even a word.
Hypothetical.
Yeah. But for me, and maybe you disagree, even if the Mets bring back Manaea, and it seems like Manaea wants to be a Met,
Right.
but money talks, BS walks, I'm not giving him 5 years. I'm just not.
Right.
And he had one good year, and he's 33 years old. And he did it at the best time, let's be honest. The pitching market's going insane. You got guys like Frankie Montas getting $70 million a year. I mean,
Yeah.
you got to add some frontline people. For me, number one, give me your thoughts. Number one, Manaea is not enough. And number two, I'm not giving him 5 years. What are your
Yeah,
thoughts?
definitely can't give him 5 years, right? No chance. That's first and foremost. Has to be a 3-year deal if you're talking Manaea. I want the urgency from the Mets to bring back Manaea because then you can build out the rest of this rotation a lot easier, I think. Because Manaea is not a 1. He's a really good 2. And Senga fits right behind him at the 3. So it feels like a match made in heaven. I mean, you're hearing numbers 4 for 76, 72 in that range. That's really low for Manaea. But
Right.
you ask yourself the question when he changed his arm slot, is that something permanent for his career? Are we going to see ace-like potential from Sean Manaea? I don't know. I really don't. So I think a 3-year deal, Ray, makes the most sense. He should be back in Queens. I have full confidence that he will.
I'm also wondering if other teams are saying, you know what? He did that with the Mets. And the Mets are, let's be honest, Dan, the Mets are developing that reputation of, if I'm a pitcher trying to get on the rebound, I'm going with Jeremy Hefner in that pitching lab over there. I mean, you listen to Montas's initial interview. He said the first thing he did when he got interest from the Mets was call Severino and call Manaea, and they were glowing about what we're doing over here in Queens, which is pretty cool because at least when I was growing up, it was all about Duncan and the Cardinals, and he did that to every pitcher that went to St. Louis. And now we might be developing that reputation where pitchers that are trying to have a bounce back or excel in their career, maybe it develops them. And that's what leads me to my next point. I did a video on it yesterday. Maybe it's wishful thinking. That was the word I was looking for. But if the Mets are serious about adding a frontline starter, and it would cost a lot for this player that I'm about to bring up, but he's younger than Castillo. He still has everything you want. He's on a team that is potentially wanting to shed salary. So maybe you take on a bad contract if you're Steve Cohen, which wouldn't be an anomaly for us, a la Verlander and Scherzer and Cano, paying him to go away. But here is your guy. Here's my guy that I would like the Mets to pursue. It's probably going to cost you Gilbert. It's probably going to cost you Ryan Clifford. And it's probably going to cost you another big prospect. But he's under contract this year and next year. And he'd immediately become a number 1 or number 2 on our staff. And that is Michael King. Let's take a deeper dive into the numbers.
I like it.
Last year, he pitched 31 games, a 1.19 whip with a 2.95 ERA. Number 1 stuff, and it's not a fluke. Look at these statistics. He has had an ERA in the 2s since 2022. 34 games started, 49 games pitched in 23, 31 games in 24. Look at these whips. A whip of 1, a whip of 115, 119. To me, a guy like Michael King, who might be a player where you say, you know what? San Diego's trying to get out from some of these awful contracts because they're learning like everybody else. It's easy to pay right away, but now they're feeling the effects. Maybe you say, you know what? I'll take on you, Darvish. He's got 38 years old. Right. He's got $18 million left a year for the next 4 years. I will eat that Yu Darvish money. You give us Michael King, and maybe we only have to give up a Gilbert and a Ryan Clifford, something like that. I'm trying to get a little creative here because we all know aces don't grow on trees. You saw what a guy like Garrett Crochet got, who probably has better stuff than Michael King, if we're being honest.
For sure.
But what are your thoughts on this?
I like it. Right. That's out of left field. I like it. I like the idea because it's a two-parted thing. We never want to bash the Yankees as much as possible. But say Michael King goes to the Mets, wins a Cy Young. I mean, that's who they traded for their 1-year rental in Soto. I mean, that's just a tough decision. But listen, Michael King's great. I love the way he throws, too. That's kind of cross-body delivery. It really gets a lot of swings and misses on his slider. But Michael King would be awesome. I mean, that's an ace that you can put in this lineup that puts right in front of Manaea. And you look at the rest of this Mets rotation with Senga, Peterson, Clay Holmes, too. I mean, we heard his introductory press conference this week.
Mm-hmm.
Sounded great. Credited Hefner, credited all these guys. You can feel comfortable with his sinker. So I think there's going to be a lot of those what if trades that we see, like a Jesus Lazardo. I know I've been floating that around, but who knows if they still want Beatty at this point. But definitely something to consider. Michael King would be an awesome addition to have.
I made one mistake. This is his last year at 10 million. But if you're trying to go for it all this year, I mean, that's a go for it all player. He's 30
Definitely.
years old. Maybe he would entertain an extension. You'd have to
like
look
Dylan
at that.
Cease.
Right.
I put him in that Dylan Cease category.
Mm-hmm. Now let's go on to maybe a potential backup plan for Alonso, because let's be honest, who the heck else is out there right now, Dan? I mean,
Beats me, right?
Everyone's gone. I mean, the Mets also could pivot to signing Bregman and moving Vientos to first. That's always an option that they have, but I think the Mets are conflicted a little. I'm not sold that Pete Alonso is a David Stearns type of player, but when you hear Steve Cohen think and say, I know the consequences of losing a guy to Pete Alonso to another team, what it would do to this fan base, to homegrown, I think that plays a little much into it. But I actually think that Pete Alonso and Scott Boras made a mistake, because I don't think they're going to get that offer that the Mets offered them originally, that 7-year contract. I mean, would you be surprised if you woke up tomorrow and you see Pete Alonso agrees to a 5-year, $125 million contract?
Not at all. With the New York Mets of all teams, absolutely, because there's not many left. I mean, right, if we're going to think about it, we could think about it too with Bregman. The Mariners are always looking for, corners around the infield. Why not?
Mm-hmm.
They're always a team. The Nationals are, I guess you could put them in the mix because they want to build around someone. But listen, yeah, the market's very bare for the polar bear, pun fully intended. I mean, hopefully he comes back to Queens. I think it feels really, at this point, there's no other option for Pete. That's a good thing. And Ray, listen, how many times in your sports fandom, you're older than I, but it doesn't happen often where you have full
Not by much, Dan.
Well, you have full fan bases pleading for a player to come back. I mean, it just feels like a match made in heaven. Get it done.
Now let's bring up somebody that you just spoke about, because I've never been a big fan of him. It's been rumored that the New York Mets have been interested in him for quite a long time. Jesus Lazardo. Let's talk. Are you worried at all about his year last year? He's only 12 games, but that 5 ERA. You look at everything else. The WHIP was up slightly. The innings pitch was way down. I mean, it feels like it's inevitable he's going to be a Met. They were interested in Beatty. I mean, what are your full thoughts on Jesus Lazardo?
I mean, the Marlins have been interested in Beatty for a while, but when Kim Ng left, I imagine a lot of people left with her too, and they probably don't feel the same about Brett Beatty up there, or down there rather, but it could be an option. I do think Brett Beatty has value. I think a lot of us like to think that he doesn't, because we've seen the highs and the lows of him, but he does. He can definitely be a good player in a different environment, and I think the Marlins could be an option. Lazardo, you think about the injuries, definitely, but that 2023 season he had, and yeah, I mean, he's estimated next year 8.6, and then he hits arbitration, then he's a free agent 2027. So you have team
You have
control.
2 years.
Yeah, that's great. A lefty who the Mets desperately need. We don't have really a lefty in our rotation besides Peterson at the moment. So
Right.
Another guy that you can go out and get.
Interesting to me, though. It's funny because this is what I start thinking about every time we get a pitcher now. What would they do in our pitching lab?
Right.
What would a guy like Jesus Lazardo, a hard-throwing lefty, gain from our pitching lab? He's 27 years old. Is there a potential that he goes back to that 3-3 guy? Or
Definitely.
maybe even better? I mean, let's be honest. And you've seen this time and time again. When guys are pitching in meaningless games in July, it's ruthless. You hear about the dog days of August. Imagine your team's 17 games out of a wild card spot in July.
Yeah.
I can't,
trying to catch the Braves of all teams that are running away.
Right. What do you think about that?
It's interesting. I think that's a real buy low candidate. There's a bunch of buy low candidates too that can just go in this lab and see what they got. I mean, John Means is another one that's definitely been floated, played on the Orioles, great pitcher, a lefty who, again, you put him in this lab, something could happen. I think Walker Buehler, we all think about him in the lab, but I think Bueller's at the point you saw him in the World Series. He's still a really good pitcher. Like, he's going to get a good deal. So we'll see. But the Mets need to figure out this pitching, and credit to the pitching lab because it clearly works. Luis Severino got the bag, the largest guaranteed contract in A's history. Like, that is unbelievable. So good for him and good for the lab too, I guess, for the Mets.
You know what's interesting? What I'm thinking about?
Yeah.
Another pitcher that's on the Marlins. I'm going to bring up his pay right now. He's coming off. Yeah.
Alcantara. I think it's Alcantara.
Yeah, Alcantara. I call Alcantara whatever. Sandy. Let's just call him Sandy. Not Alderson.
He's gross.
Not the guy who brought us James McCann. But right. I'll tell you this. This year he's making 17 million. 17 and so you have 17 this year, 17 and 26, and then a club option for 21. For a team like Miami, that might not be great value, but a team like the Mets, that could be crazy value.
Yeah.
You know they don't want to pay players if they're not trying to win this year. I know he's coming off Tommy John surgery, but I mean his stats speak for themselves, don't they?
Yeah. No, he's nasty. I remember like back when I used to play the show, right? He was like one of the best pitchers to use because his pinpoint control, this guy threw 100, like he was gross. And I think it would be a really good steal for the Mets. Another guy I want you to maybe look up if you can, Pablo Lopez of the Twins, because with this max free deal and these big deals you're seeing, Blake Snell, even Soto's to an extent, the whole market's inflated. And all of these pitchers who were worth a lot and got these contracts a couple years ago, it's pennies compared to what they could be making now. So they could get a return on these guys. And Pablo Lopez, yeah, that's another one.
Here's Alcantara's stats. Okay, obviously in 23, the down year, but 22, 228, that's when he won the Cy Young. 319, 30. I mean, it's threes throughout.
That 21 to 22 stretch was really good for him. And even 2019 was good too, but yeah.
Right. I think we got it. The Mets are going to get creative. I think that the trade market's definitely going to pick up, because we heard David Stearns talk about it just this offseason, how like the Mets are interested in trades. So here's Pablo Lopez's stats. Pull them up for us.
Because you see the reports throughout the week, like, oh, they're open to taking calls. I mean, if I'm the Mets, I'm calling. This is an ace.
So here's his stats. He obviously had a more down year last year, that 403. But again, when we talk about the Mets and that pitching lineup, you got 336, 375, 307, 316. I mean, he's got threes galore. That's what that's baseball today. How many guys, Dan, are actually throwing 2 ERAs?
Not many, if at all. I mean, guys nowadays, not many, Ray. Truthfully, it's a real sight to be seen when you have guys that I think the Mets see a lot of talent. I don't think the Twins would ever deal Pablo Lopez because they want to compete themselves and he's the top of their rotation. But yeah, the contracts, he would be making more, I think, on an open market than 18 a year.
Right. And think about this. After 31, you could let him walk, which is usually like, pitchers start going down at 33 years old. So if you can have him for 3 years at the top of your rotation, that changes a lot. I understand that a lot of Met fans are infatuated with getting a guy like Luis Castillo in here, but you got to look at other options. We as Met fans, and I'm just as guilty as this too, we start to infatuate over certain players, but David Stearns is not like old Mets GMs. I mean, how many minor league contracts have we seen this year, Dan? It's almost like we're building the world's greatest minor league team.
Yeah. Anthony Gose yesterday, Luis Ortiz, 2 relief arms, but yeah, not great, but you got to get it done. You got to beef up this 40-man roster, see what they have, and hopefully they have some arms that pan out.
Totally agree with you. Well, Dan, I want to thank you so much for joining me today. Where can people find you at, man?
We'll do it again.
Where can people find you on X?
Oh, X, of course. Dan Bartels 2, Instagram, Dan Bartels 1, New York Post. Let's go.
That's it. All right, Met fans. Let us know what you guys think down in the comments. I'll be sure to get back to you. I'll ask Dan his opinion. We'll definitely do this again shortly. And until next time, thanks for hanging out. Take care.